Trevor Noah is a comedian on Comedy Central and recently made a video regarding the events in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So I was a little confused as to whether the video was satire or sincere, since it is Comedy Central, he is a comedian, but the subject matter he was talking about is a pretty hot topic and serious subject for today's world. But then again, the stuff he said was just so ridiculous at times. I figure it had to have been satire. But I'm not one to underestimate the ignorance of Hollywood elites. I will assume that he was being ignorantly sincere in his recent video, which I would now like to respond to.
No matter how many times I watch these videos, I'll never get used to how quickly police go from issuing commands to using deadly force.
What would be an acceptable amount of time to go from issuing commands to using deadly force? Is it 5 seconds? Is it 30 seconds? A minute? 10 minutes? Because whatever amount of time you think is acceptable, that's going to have to be communicated to and honored by the person that is interacting with the police officer. But something tells me that they're not going to honor whatever time length you give them. I mean, Mr. Blake wouldn't even stop for 1 second, much less a few minutes.
Like, whatever happened to warning shots?
So this shows how little Trevor knows about policing, or physics for that matter. Where would a police officer put a warning shot? Would he put it in the ground and risk having a ricochet? Or would he fire it into the air? I can tell you that anyone who's been through a 4th of July knows that firing guns into the air is frowned upon by pretty much everybody, because what goes up must come down, and I can't imagine that Trevor Noah would be the kind of guy that would forgive a police officer if it injured or killed someone when it did.
I mean, think about it. Even when wild animals are loose on the streets, they don't always shoot to kill. They have tranquilizers. They have nets.
I've never seen a wild animal suddenly pull out a gun and shoot someone or whip out a knife and stab someone. See, human beings are much more complex and sophisticated and deceptive than wild animals, and therefore cannot be afforded that luxury. The behavior of humans differ from the behavior of animals, and therefore require different treatment. This is very important, as you'll see later on. So remember that the behavior determines how one is treated.
I never thought I would wish for black people to be treated at least like a wild bear, but here we are.
Here's an article about the idea that Trevor is proposing. Old lady bear tranquilized after walkabout in Monrovia neighborhood. You see, in the story, the bear was doing nothing more than minding its own business, walking around a neighborhood before it was tranquilized. Is Trevor actually advocating for police to treat suspects in this manner? You know, I mean, cops might actually endorse this tactic. I mean, Miranda rights be damned. You don't have to worry about reading them their constitutional rights. You don't have to worry about them lawyering up. You don't have to worry about them complaining about, oh, the cuffs are too tight, there's not enough room back here. You don't have to worry about any of that. You see a guy, he's walking along, he's a suspect, trank him and take him in. So if Trevor is actually advocating for this policy, you should run with it. He might have more support than he expects. Maybe not from the people that he expects.
And I know people are questioning why Blake didn't just follow the police's orders. Just listen to the cops and you'll be fine. And look, I don't know why he didn't. I don't. All right? Maybe he was worried because he had outstanding warrants. Maybe it's because he knows what happened to George Floyd when he did follow the police's orders.
Okay, I'm going to give Trevor the benefit of the doubt and assume that he didn't see the full body cam footage. Now, I'm not saying he deserved to die, but to say that Mr. Floyd would win any kind of obedience award would just be false.
They shot him 7 times. What purpose do bullets 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 serve?
Trevor demonstrates his lack of firearms ballistics knowledge. When you use a gun to stop a threat, there aren't a fixed number of rounds you're supposed to fire. You're supposed to keep shooting until the threat stops existing. As I'm sure Skokie, Illinois Police Department officer Timothy Grammons would attest to, as he once had to shoot a suspect 14 times before he would cease being a threat. Guy now carries 145 rounds of ammo, and I don't blame him at all.
Outrage igniting in Kenosha, a city on fire. Rioters are smashing traffic lights, storming businesses, looting, torching buildings and cars.
From Battalion 1, we have multiple cars on fire.
As demonstrators faced off with police, tensions quickly escalating. Authorities pepper spraying civilians.
The entire site, as you can see, still smoldering, and firefighters are still running around town dealing with several sites, just like this one. The governor deployed 125 members of the National Guard here yesterday to help as those peaceful protests during the day turned destructive after the 8 p.m. curfew.
Yes, for 3 days now, the streets of Kenosha have been ablaze. And although there have been peaceful protests, I mean, that inevitably gets overshadowed when there's so much civil unrest.
Okay, for the record, the word civil does not belong in the same sentence as the acts depicted in the previous footage.
That's right, last night, some guy decided to drive to Kenosha with his militia buddies to protect a business, and apparently ended up shooting 3 people and killing 2. But don't worry, the business is okay.
Actually, no, the business is not okay.
And let me tell you something. No one drives into a city with guns because they love someone else's business that much. That's some bullshit. No one has ever thought, oh, it's my solemn duty to pick up a rifle and protect that TJ Maxx. They do it because they're hoping to shoot someone.
Trevor's mind-reading skills aside, he may want to consider that some of these guys who volunteer to protect these businesses aren't actually doing it for the businesses themselves. Because when you see peaceful protesters committing acts like this,
Holy shit.
Get your ass up. I wish you would. I wish you would. Oh, God. I wish you would.
or this, maybe it's not about the business. Maybe it's about the innocent people that are being victimized by these peaceful protesters.
That's the only reason people like him join these gangs in the first place. And yes, I said it, a gang.
It's funny you call them a gang. Tell me, Trevor, when's the last time you seen a gang member cleaning up their own graffiti? Or any graffiti for that matter. When was the last time you saw a gang member with a first aid kit?
What brought you out here tonight? You just wanted to provide medical attention?
Provide medical attention to people that need it. If somebody's injured, like, you get hurt, I'm grabbing you. That's my med kit.
I mean, is it standard protocol for gang members to carry medical kits in case anyone needs first aid?
How come Jacob Blake was seen as a deadly threat for a theoretical gun that he might have and might try to commit a crime with? But this gunman who was armed and had already shot people who had shown that he is a threat was arrested the next day, given full due process of the law, and generally treated like a human being whose life matters.
So going back to my previous theory about behavior dictating the way you are treated, you'll see why the two individuals were treated so differently. So first we have Mr. Rittenhouse, who let go of his weapon, put up his arms, showed his hands in a very compliant manner without even being asked to do so. Mr. Blake, on the other hand, would not stop moving, would not show his hands, would not raise his arms, and continued to proceed to a vehicle, the contents of which he knew were unknown to the officers, yet he proceeded to that vehicle anyway despite numerous commands not to. So as you can see, those are two very different behaviors exhibited by the individuals, and my theory is that is what led to the outcome, the two different outcomes that you speak of.
How did Dylan Roof shoot up a church, James Holmes shoot up a movie theater, and both live to tell about it? Why is it that the police decide that some threats must be extinguished immediately while other threats get the privilege of being diffused?
So I haven't seen the footage of the actual arrest of Mr. Holmes or Mr. Roof, but I will say this. People are considered to be threats based on the behavior they exhibit and the actions they take at the time of interaction. All right? Someone could kill 1,000 people, but when the cops go to arrest him, if they are completely compliant, do not resist, evade, or otherwise deviate from the officer's instructions, they should expect to make it out just fine. Just like Mr. Roof and Mr. Holmes.
The answer is that the gun doesn't matter as much as who is holding the gun.
There's something we can agree on, finally.
Because to some people, black skin is the most threatening weapon of all.
And just like that, common ground comes to an end. People like Mr. Noah may place a large emphasis and a large significance on skin color, but it would be very unfair to generalize everyone into that category. When you're dealing with life or death situations and calling out threats, skin color is very superficial and very insignificant when compared to the actual behaviors exhibited by those individuals.